Hello and welcome everyone to the main event webinar this week. I'm Meeta Sahni and I'm really pleased to be joined a returning guest of ours, Emma Griffiths. Emma, hi, how are you doing?
Hello, really well. Nice to see you. Nice to have everybody joining us today.
Indeed, and nice to have you back. For people that haven't met Emma before on our webinar series, Emma is a very experienced employment lawyer and a partner at Draper Lang, an organisation, a firm that we go back years and years doing law forums and doing partnering on helping our clients with not just legal and talent challenges, but actually business challenges that hopefully will help you go back into your space and be able to add value very quickly. So I'll start with a bit of housekeeping. Our webinars, again, some of you will have heard this, so I apologise for repeating myself, but I do like to let you know that these are interactive webinars. We ultimately want, as I said, for you to be able to go away with knowledge, information, advice, and ideas that you can put to use straight away. For that reason, we have a chat box to the right here, which is really easy. You can literally just type in a comment, and I'm just doing an example there, saying hello, and we will answer it. And we will always, if we don't manage to cover it off during the session, because we try to keep the sessions about 30 to 40 minutes, not too long. Again, we know how precious your time is. We will come back to you. So please, don't be shy. Comments, questions, thoughts, ideas, anything like that, pop it onto the chat box. Also, Emma and I are running a poll today, and we want to get a feel of the room. We want to understand how you have come across mental health. We'll talk about the topic in a little bit more detail. But the poll today is whether you have had to manage or support colleagues with mental health issues. And the options are yes, a very long time ago, yes, more recently, or no, not seen it at all. And that will then help us understand what you're facing. And again, hopefully for the next half an hour of the session, Emma and I can give you some insight. Okay, so the topic today, Emma, we're ending the month of May soon. Well, we're only on the 19th, but it feels like it's been a long month already. And it was Mental Health Week last week, and for that reason, we thought we'd make our legal clinic this month all around mental health issues. And you and I talked about this, and we said that we wanted to help employers really understand what their rights were, what their employees' rights are within the workplace, because ultimately, dealing with mental health issues, it feels like more people are talking about it, but not necessarily everyone isn't necessarily equipped to deal with things.
I think that's right. I think a lot of employers only deal with it when a problem arises. So there will be many that are, particularly larger organisations that have proactive HR teams and plans and lots of steps in place. Yeah. There'll be lots of employers who are smaller employers that would love to have that proactivity but haven't got there yet. So they tend to deal with it as an employee has an issue. And sometimes it's with all things, isn't it? If you can step back and plan and know where you are before you end up in that crisis point, it's always the better position to be in.
Indeed. And you're right, for those smaller organisations, they don't necessarily have the bandwidth to be able to preempt. And yet it can be quite simple. It doesn't need to be an extra complicated system of support, I think.
No, I think you're right. A lot of it's about communication. And I think one of the things I wanted to flag, and particularly for people that are supporting smaller organisations or that might be managing or leading HR teams or just leading the teams in smaller organisations, is the ACAS website, which is really, really helpful. And ACAS have a note which is called Promoting Positive Mental Health at Work. And it's not long, and it just gives you the sort of key highlights and things that it's really useful to take away. So if there's one thing to look at after that, it's the ACAS. After this, if you haven't got anything in place, ACAS is a great starting point.
Brilliant, thank you. Even I didn't know about that, so I'm going to, and I thought I'd done my research this month especially. So that's brilliant. I'm going to have a look at that. And so we're breaking down our session today into 3 areas. First and foremost, we're going to look at what your rights are, what your employee rights are when dealing with mental health issues in the workplace. Then we're going to talk about when a mental health condition becomes a disability and therefore has protected characteristics under the Equality Act. And then finally, Emma and I are going to speak with you about how you can support your colleagues with their mental health. So that will probably be interspersed throughout the session, but we'd like you to be able to go away with some real thoughts and plans of what to put in place. But the ACAS site is number 1 on that list already. Brilliant. So Emma, where would we start with this? Because we think we know, and yet when you sort of gave me a little debrief pre going live, I realized, God, I don't know at all. And I think I know quite a lot.
Well, I think nobody, me included, certainly nobody knows everything, do they? So it's every day's a learning curve, and this is such an evolving thing. And just interestingly, looking at the poll, you see that most people's answer is yes, more recently. And that shows that, you know, a lot of people are facing mental health challenges. So before I dive into what are your rights and what are your employees' rights, I thought it's just helpful to say how ACAS defines mental health.
Okay.
So that's defined as our emotional, psychological and social well-being, and it affects how we think, feel, act, and how we cope with normal pressures of everyday life. And you translate that to the workplace straight away, how you think, how you feel, how you act. That's just, it goes without saying it affects you at work. And it goes without saying when you step away and look at somebody that might be struggling, that it's going to affect them at work. It doesn't always necessarily go without saying to a manager that's trying to work out why the deadlines haven't been hit.
Yeah.
And then just to think about some statistics, and I think we're all bombarded with statistics, and I think everybody knows that a healthy workplace and a happy workplace is more productive. But just a few stats I pulled is that 1 in almost 7 people experience mental health problems in the workplace. So 1 in almost every 7 of your colleagues, of your employees, will at some point experience mental health issue. Almost 13% of every sickness absence day is mental health related. And I would wager it's higher than that, because it's much easier for someone to say they've got a tummy bug than a stress or anxiety or mental health related. Still, even with everybody talking about reducing stigma, it is still easier for people to claim it's something physical. So I'm sure it's higher. And there's something like £8 billion could be saved across British businesses per year by better management of mental health.
Gosh, that's a huge number. And I've got one to add to that, which again looks at the equality piece around women facing nearly twice as women in full-time employment are nearly twice as likely to have a common mental health problem than a man, 19.8% versus 10.9%. So, you know, that essentially, if you say 1 in 7, that means, you know, every manager will have somebody in their team that they need to be aware of and support, and ultimately getting that balance between what the business needs and what their people need, and being aware of both, right? That's the manager's duty.
Absolutely. And I think that leads us on quite nicely to thinking about rights, doesn't it? And what your rights are with the business and what employees' rights are. So as an employee, you've obviously got health and safety duties. You've got a duty to take reasonable care for the health and safety of your employees. And I think people think of health and safety as the physical workplace environment, first and foremost, but it's obviously a much broader thing than that. If you're providing somebody with an excess workload and a ridiculously excess workload that you know could affect their mental health, you're arguably in breach of your health and safety duty. So you have to provide a safe place of work and a safe system of working.
So things like hours worked, checking back on, are people responding to emails at crazy hours? Are they logging in, 6 a.m. and logging off at midnight? It's not just seeing what's going on at the time. It's doing some reflecting, isn't it? And really, because I think there's also, there's cultures, and, employers can have a policy, but the culture of presenteeism, which actually working remotely almost has blurred that 9 to 6, 9 to 5 feeling, where people respond over their cereal or they respond after hours because they haven't physically moved on, and they sometimes don't mentally move on either. I know that's a huge challenge for so many. But that is a responsibility of the employer to note and deal with. Absolutely.
And I think also you're right to say, pick up the pattern if people are often responding at midnight, because there's a potential issue there. But actually, sometimes it might be better for that employee's personal life. They might prefer to dash out the door and do something before they go to bed. So for me, it's really about knowing your employee, having that ongoing dialogue so that they can come to you if they're having an issue and they know your door is open and they know you are ready and able and willing to support. And also understanding for them that actually that might be really normal for them. So there's some workplaces that have the you must not touch your email after 6 o'clock policy, and there's still the minority, but they exist. I know of some people that find that incredibly stressful.
That's more
stressful. I need to go home and sort something out, and then I want to email later. So that can add stress. So it's about tailoring what you do.
Exactly. understanding everyone individually, understanding what's going on for them. And I think for managers that think, right, well, I can do the work side, I know what's going on there, don't be afraid to ask your senior leadership for more support if you don't feel that you've got the tools. Because actually one of the polls that we did last week on LinkedIn was asking people whether they thought that their managers would be able to support them or a colleague in the face of mental health challenges. And half said no. Half said yes, but a whole half said no. So that's pretty scary in and of itself.
Absolutely. And I'm a glass half full person, but that statistic is not good enough. And I suspect way more than half of employers would be able to support. They might not have a formal policy or steps in place, but I'm sure more than half would be able to support their employees. But what they're probably very bad on is communicating that and making it clear. And more employers have, and we'll talk later about how you can support your employees at work. And one of those things would be to put in a policy around stress at work and supporting mental health, so it's visible. Yeah. But it's that visibility about the support that you can put in place that's really, really important. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just summarising to say, so we obviously have the physical environment at the office. We have a culture that has to be defined and to work in a collegiate, collaborative way that considers mental health and well-being within its mission statement. I believe should be that prevalent. And then, as we said, it's the intangible of noting people's behaviours and whether it's a mental health issue or whether it's just the way they like to work. It's a lot.
Absolutely. And the intangible doesn't just relate to health and safety. It relates to something we talked about on our previous webinar, which is constructive unfair dismissal. So there is an implied duty in every employment contract that an employer will act reasonably. So if you are overloading somebody time and time again, if you are ignoring the signs of stress, if you're ignoring cries for help, if somebody's saying I'm being pushed, harassed, bullied, whatever it may be, and I'm suffering, then if you don't act on that as an employer, ultimately an employee can say you have breached that implied term of trust and confidence, that implied term to act reasonably. So I'm resigning now, but I'm not just resigning, I'm resigning and I'm going to claim constructive dismissal because your behaviour as an employer has pushed me out.
And that is a huge potential risk for every employer if they haven't got their finger on the pulse, because this could be happening in one team where a manager hasn't used the tools or got the tools, and there could be an owner or a boss somewhere else thinking everything is hunky-dory, and before you know it, there's lawsuits going on. I mean, that's crazy. That's what you were telling me before, and I just thought, wow, that reasonableness is very important. I had to clarify.
It underpins absolutely everything. It's absolutely crucial, and it's just so important that things are picked up before crisis point. And I think it's a typical thing, isn't it, of mental health. People don't speak out as people that are suffering from mental health difficulties. Typically, it's harder for people to speak out or for employers to recognise and intervene at the right time. So that communication and that open dialogue so that you can pick things up before they reach crisis point. And it's either a crisis point with somebody's mental health, so that suddenly they have hit burnout and then they're signed off for an extraordinarily long period of time. And it's not uncommon for people with burnout to be off for 6 months or a year by the time all told. Yeah. Or it's the crisis point of an employer saying either your performance has hit rock bottom and we're now performance managing you, or your behaviour to others is totally inappropriate, because actually, again, hand in hand with mental health might change behaviours. People may actually start behaving in a way that is uncommon for them, potentially aggressive, maybe at work. And then you're in a disciplinary situation. So again, everything, if you can hit it early and prevent, is better. If you can't and we reach crisis point, then we can help you manage it. But everybody would prefer to not be in that scenario.
Absolutely. And, things like having mental health first aiders, or even having awareness chats and saying, signs of depression and signs of mental health challenges are not always sad and tears. Like you said, it could be disengaging, disinterest, weight loss or weight gain, somebody behaving in an aggressive way, usually to defend their position and not have to talk about what's going on for them. So it's education, isn't it? It's
like lapses in memory, not completely concentrating, the kind of stuff you just put down to they're off the ball, they're not interested, the performance isn't right. Actually, if you start to notice that with an employee, it's just good management, but it's especially with this in mind, just pull them to one side. Is everything okay? Notice things aren't quite right. Notice you're missing this, that, and the other. Not doing this to criticize you, but I want to understand how I can support you. Please know that you can tell me anything and we'll support you. Those interventionist chats are so helpful.
I agree. And also having, I think it's really important to have some consistency with touch points with every member of the team, with a manager, and having a check-in and being able to show vulnerability yourself and saying, you know what, having a bit of a day today, but not, and then being able to talk about work and saying, how are you? What's going on with you? Not that, are you okay? Because people usually say, yes, I'm fine, but actually probing what's going on for you at the moment. And someone somewhere, and I can't remember where, because I've had a lot of conversations this month about mental health, but I spoke to somebody about the fact that you can actually, similar to we have a form when people join in our induction and we say, how would you like feedback? And we talk about whether people, because we're a coaching environment, we can do that on the floor, literally lean over and say, hey, just noted this, or is it something that you're not happy to talk publicly, would take it to a room in your one-to-ones. We ask those questions so that you can actually have an onboarding questionnaire around your mental health, and that, if you're having a mental health challenge, how would you like to be supported? Have you come across anything like that?
I haven't come across anything like that as part of onboarding, other than the standard form that says, are there any it's usually, are there any disabilities that we ought to be aware of so that we can make reasonable adjustments? And you've got to tick yes and no. So no, I don't think it hurts as part of an induction, not necessarily to talk about somebody specifically, but to say that this is what we do as an organisation. This is how we support. If we recognise that life can be difficult and challenges can come from time to time. And if you struggle with anything, this is how to talk to people and this is how to do it. And we're a very open environment. You can naturally lead on from that, I guess, to say, look, is there anything that you'd like to tell us? And we treat it in confidence and in accordance with GDPR and everything else. And you don't have to. If you want to, it's a safe space. You can absolutely have that conversation. It's just about how that data is then used, because I think a lot of people will fear the vulnerability of that when they are just starting at work. They shouldn't. So it's when and how you have that conversation. I think that's important.
Indeed. And I think that, again, is something that employers need to be aware of, that at the start people may not be ready, but it doesn't mean you don't check in again. But what if an employee doesn't share what they're going through, and then there is an impact on their work or the environment? They don't tell their employer, and therefore
that's the issue. That's when it comes out, isn't it?
Yeah.
Almost always the time when it comes out is suddenly somebody's landed with a performance management program or performance improvement program, and suddenly they say, I'm having mental health challenges, or there is a grievance made about them, often about the manager and about management style, and then that's the point the manager says, actually I'm suffering from XYZ. That gives you, as a manager handling that, a headache, to be honest, because it's not suddenly as straightforward as managing a performance issue. It's not so straightforward as a disciplinary, so you then have to probe into that.
And if a business has made the necessary structures, policies, had the conversations, created opportunities for somebody to discuss it, if they've done all that and it's been noted that they've had the check-ins and the questions and the employee hasn't stepped forward to have that conversation, does that protect an employer to... I'm not saying it's not about getting away. It's about a business understanding what they need to do and to know that they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, it helps to a point. And we'll move on in a moment and talk about disability. And disability discrimination applies, or obligations for an employer applies when they know or reasonably ought to have known that somebody's suffering from a disability. So if you've given everybody every opportunity and they've never said, and then you suddenly sack them.
Can you say that again? Because
if you know the employee is suffering from a disability, or if you reasonably ought to have known. And if you didn't know and you didn't reasonably ought to have known, and say you dismiss somebody on their probationary period because they've not hit performance, and you've put in place all of the things that you've talked about in terms of giving people a line to talk to you, etc., and you've had a conversation with them about their performance, and that they've not given you anything about mental health, and you've given them the opportunity and they've not given anything back, and you dismiss them because they failed probation because their performance isn't hitting target. You didn't know because they've not told you they suffered from a disability. There's nothing that you reasonably ought to have known, because they've not been absent, they've not been upset and visibly upset at work, they've not talked about it. So you protect yourself a lot from discrimination in that respect. If, however, you have that conversation, and in the probation they say, actually, I'm suffering from depression, anxiety, etc., which may impact on performance, then you need to go into a process of understanding their health condition, how it may impact on them, making reasonable adjustments for them at work, maybe extending the probation, extending the deadlines, cutting the target, and reviewing at that stage. And once you've been told, you can't unhear it. You can't pretend you don't know. So once you've been told, you have to take reasonable steps.
Okay, so we talk about having the book, having the policy, having the processes, everything to support. But as you said, there comes a point when somebody may have a condition, but this section we're talking about next, about when a condition becomes a disability. Walk us through that. What would a scenario look like in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just quickly, just because I've got a little list of 5 potential claims an employee suffering with mental health could bring, and I think I just want to quickly run through those so that our audience are aware of those. So you've got the health and safety thing, but that's not something employees will come after you for. That's typically the health and safety executive, and there's criminal sanctions there if you're not supporting health and safety at work. For employees, the obvious ones are the constructive unfair dismissal that I've talked about. They may also bring personal injury claims, because you've given me so much excessive workload, for example, that it's caused me stress and made me ill. So you've got potential personal injury. You've got potential claims under Protection from Harassment Act if somebody's been, if there's perhaps the source of their mental health difficulties is harassment and bullying at work. So again, that bullying, harassment, anti-bullying harassment policies that are good to have are useful here too. And then you've got discrimination. So the discrimination claims that can be brought, direct discrimination, indirect discrimination, harassment, and failure to make reasonable adjustments. That is the big risk for employers, because that's what people know about. That's something you can bring a discrimination claim from day one. You can bring it as an applicant if you've been discriminated against on grounds of disability. So unfair dismissal.
Even adverts for jobs people can bring claims against adverts. So yeah.
Absolutely. Really, unfair dismissal, typically there are some automatic unfair dismissals where the 2-year qualifying period doesn't apply, but in most cases unfair dismissal applies when you've been employed for 2 years or more. Discrimination, as I say, right from the start, and discrimination compensation is uncapped. So it is potentially, and that sounds scary, and there are various thresholds and things that tribunals use, but as a worst case scenario, it's an unlimited financial award, it's horrendous reputational damage, and it's a lot of time. So you don't want to get caught out. So as you say, it is important to know when somebody's mental health issue trips into being a disability.
Okay.
And the answer to when it does is when the tribunal says it does. So you don't know that
at all.
No, so you know that when you're in a tribunal room, but obviously it uses established tests. So the tests are for disability, and this is for physical or a mental disability. This is the employee's got to have a physical or mental impairment. So for a mental health issue, you're going to tick that box. Yeah. The impairment must have substantial effects on that individual's ability to carry out normal day-to-day life. Okay. So examples that are given are like, simple things to people when they're well, getting on a bus, getting out of bed, making their breakfast, that kind of stuff. If it's having a substantial adverse effect on that, and the effects have got to be long term, and that's defined as either have lasted 12 months or be likely to last 12 months or more.
Okay.
So if somebody says to you, I struggle with anxiety and depression, straight away you can see that you tick mental impairment box, you tick likelihood of substantial adverse effect on day-to-day life, because the reality is for those conditions at some point they're going to have that effect. The question is whether the substantial effects are going to last 12 months or more. And
how do you know?
Exactly. And so my advice is treat employees as if they have got that protection. Act with caution, and you get, when you're in the place of you may need to dismiss somebody, or you feel somebody's performance is lacking because of, and they've raised the flag, or that there may be a mental health issue at play, at that point it's to get the legal advice and the medical advice. So you want legal advice early doors so you don't trip up, because again, employers come to me over and over again after they've tripped up, and I'd love to talk to them before so that they don't trip up. And it's the medical advice. So if you've got access to occupational health, getting people off to occupational health quickly, because occupational health can give you a view on how long it may last and on what you can do as an employer to support.
So you could even, when they say, I suffer from anxiety and depression from time to time, get them to see somebody in occupational health there and then? Was that something an employer would do?
Yeah, I think you don't want to be directly discriminating. So if somebody says to you, I suffer from this, and you say, right, automatic tick box, off you go to occupational health, then I think arguably that might be a detriment, actually. If there's nothing presenting, you can certainly offer it, because you can say, look, to make sure we're supporting you at work, you've made us aware of this condition, can we do that? Most commonly it's used when there's a performance issue or an absence management issue, often absence management in particular.
When there are certain signs that start to present themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you say, look, we have concerns, we'd like to send you to occupational health, or we have concerns, and often with an absence that's ongoing, it becomes, we have concerns, we're worried about your absence, we're going to have to start managing your absence now, because we've talked a lot actually about employees' rights. Employers also have the right to expect that people will generally come to work and do the job. And as part of that, if somebody is off for an extended period of time, you have to manage that absence. So you have to manage that absence for two reasons. One, to offer all the support to the employee to see if you can bring them back, and how you bring them back, and how you support them to come back, because ultimately you hired that person, they may have contributed to the workforce for a really long time.
They're the ones you want to do. Absolutely.
And we all know recruitment is hard, we all know recruitment is costly. If you've got someone good, help build them up.
Absolutely. That's my message.
If you've got someone off for a really long period of time, you want to be able to manage that absence actively, actually, to say, look, how long is this likely to go on? Because one, that helps you put in place cover and support. And two, if you're looking at, a 6, 12 longer month absence, then you need to be talking ultimately about whether you move to a capability related dismissal, because they're not fit to work.
And can you go into that a little bit more? Because again, from my perspective, I wouldn't know the detail on that. And that's very interesting. That's new to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So to dismiss somebody fairly, you need to have a fair reason. And people are very familiar with redundancy conduct as fair reasons for dismissal. One of the others is capability. And capability then splits off into two strands. One is performance. So just a straightforward, you're not doing well enough, so you take somebody through a series of warnings. The other strand of capability is ill health, and if somebody is ever going to be fit to return to work again, essentially. And you do have scenarios, and we help our clients manage scenarios when employees are just clearly never going to be fit to return. And in that case, it's about doing a similar process to a disciplinary, but without the sort of the guilt and the sort of sternness, I guess, that's associated with the disabilities. It's doing a process where you're inviting somebody to a meeting, you're explaining to them that you have concerns, it's bringing them in to talk about it, it's then definitely getting a medical report. You don't want to dismiss for capability without a medical report, preferably from their treating doctor as part of the process. And you ask the doctor certain questions about, how are they, can they come back? What adjustments can we make? Can we make any adjustments to bring them back? Are they foreseeably able to come back? You also ask the question, is in the view of the doctor, are they disabled? Because it's helpful to know that. And from that, then ultimately you bring them back in, you have that other formal meeting, right to be accompanied. And if you really can't get there, then you ultimately dismiss somebody for capability and give them the right of appeal. And often in that scenario, you'll have an employee who is on board with the fact they're not going to be able to work again, and they'd rather go in the least worst way. Other times you get an employee who's in denial about their condition, or you've got an employee that just absolutely wants to fight it all the way. Or another thing, if you're ever faced with that scenario, ill health retirement. Don't forget, if you have the option, and it's linked to various insurance products or sometimes pensions, whether you can look at, permanent health insurance for somebody if they're no longer fit to work, if that benefit exists, or ill health retirement. And you should always look at that before dismissing. But that's definitely a topic for another day. But the point is, for employers, is just because somebody's off long term, it doesn't mean there's nothing you can do. You can manage the process.
Yeah. God, Emma, that is so interesting, and actually shows that, it is very much a two-way street. It is about communication, but there are tools to support, but also to keep your business robust and successful in the face of different scenarios, and no two scenarios are the same. So it is very much about hopefully working with people like yourself to address things correctly before the problem arises, but also having thought about how you support people in the workplace to start with.
Yes.
And demonstrate that.
Absolutely. So I think more and more of our employer clients now actively have a stress and mental health well-being at work policy. And if you don't and you need one, get in touch with me, because it's very easy for me to help you with that. But it's one is that's actively demonstrating that you have a commitment to mental health and that you are willing to listen. You know, having that policy. Obviously, don't just have a policy and let it gather dust or, you know, metaphorical dust on an intranet somewhere. You need to communicate it. You need to let people know. It's saying to people that, you know, you are actively willing to consider and support when people have mental health issues. And then, as well as the policy, it's those proactive things you can do. As you said, looking at people's working patterns. Are people suddenly working really excessively? And it's stepping in to kind of support with that. It's doing things like making sure you have access to occupational health. If budget allows, it doesn't always, but if it does, that's great. Confidential counselling and helplines and employee assistance programs. They often minimal cost, actually. The employee assistance helplines.
Benefit.
Absolutely. To be able to say to somebody, here's someone you can talk to. And then also the things we're seeing more and more and more as mental health champions and mental health first aiders. And I don't know about you, but I see on my HR colleagues' email footers now routinely, I am a mental health first aider, come to me if you need support.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that more and more and more and more and consistently. And again, I've never looked at the cost of putting that in place, but I can't imagine that it's an excessive cost to put some people on courses and then they signpost themselves to everybody.
It's in the hundreds. It's not, you know, ridiculously priced. So that is something every organisation should consider, their first aider and their mental health first aider or mental health.
Absolutely. And then it's all the stuff we talked about before. It's promoting that open culture. It's feeding back on performance and making that dialogue a regular thing so that you intervene before you've hit crisis point, ideally. And if you do hit crisis point, that there is a dialogue and an openness and a respect and two-way street there that people can call upon. Really. So there's all those proactive things. But I do encourage looking into those employee assistance helplines and mental health first aiders. And if you have a mental health first aider, actually that email foot is great, because that's seeping into my consciousness every time I see it.
Exactly. And, you know, I also think, again, employers sometimes think that it has to be all singing, all dancing. Pick a couple of things. Pick one thing. You know, if you're going to take one thing away from where you are now to where you want to get to, you know, don't expect that you know, it's all or nothing. Just start on that journey towards the awareness, having someone in place or signing up for an EAP. And I think also be flexible. One size doesn't fit all. Know that, you know, everyone's journey is individual. And I know for myself, I've always, you know, been aware of mental health challenges and, you know, from sort of family. I'm very young in a much older family. My brothers are all 10 to 15 years older than me. One of my siblings had mental health challenges and it wasn't well received. So I knew already that there were these stigmas that can exist. And that's what it was like when I started work. And over the last sort of 10 to 15 years, that openness is so well received. And yet people still are afraid to show themselves because they see it's seen as a sign of weakness. So I think as leaders, lead with compassion, but lead with authenticity as well. You know, don't be afraid to talk about your own mental health challenges and, you know, to know that I can have that and still be damn good at what I do. Sometimes I might need to have flexi days. Sometimes, you know, we offer people condensed days. Think about shorter days. Think about, it could be for a month. Somebody needs to work, you know, a third less. Let's review it in a month, see where you are then. You know, whatever you put in place doesn't have to be forever. And I think sometimes we've got this all or nothing mindset where, oh my God, if we do that, then that means this. No, actually, if you do that, it just means that for then. And then you move on to, you know, another solution and revisit challenges, but constantly be creative in that. You know, don't be limited by what you've done. Actually, the way to support people is ask them what they need as well. We don't always have the answers as employers. You know, ask your employees. I say do group sessions sometimes, you know, what would help you.
So just as a separate note, accept that as an employer, as a HR leader, as a manager, whatever you may be in your business, the chances are you're probably not a medic. And that is one thing that people will do is kind of do. instantly apply their own knowledge of perhaps somebody they've known that's had a mental health struggle, or perhaps just what they've seen or perceived they've seen in the media or whatever it may be. And they'll say, well, they can't be, for example, they're not crying all the time, they can't be depressed, or, you know, it's something like that. Or, well, this condition doesn't affect that. It doesn't affect, it shouldn't affect performance, or it shouldn't affect whatever it may be. Actually, that is such a dangerous assumption. And tribunals criticise employers over and over and over again for that, because go off to the medics. Ask the medics whether or not actually their illness, the condition that they are suffering with, ask whether that can impact on this aspect of work, if whatever this aspect of work is the struggle.
There's lots of support and advice out there, isn't there? You don't have to make decisions in the dark, and you don't have to be guessing. We have a question in the box, in the chat box. So Dee asks, does ticking the mental impairment box hinder the employer when going into their next role, hinder the employee when going into their next role?
Yes, I think you mean the employee, don't you? It shouldn't, because if it does, and you give somebody, a reference that's discriminatory, then there's a disability discrimination claim. I mean, look, most employers will only give factual references. So from your previous employer, they shouldn't be disclosing anything about your mental health for data protection, confidentiality, general decency, and their own risk management. So they should only be saying really dates of employment, etc. Going into a new role, if you tick the mental impairment box, yes, some people will think that, that might hold me back, or I might not progress, or I might get held back at interview or whatever. I think in some ways it gives you more protection. It gives you more protection legally, because it goes back to that point you asked me at the start, Meeta, about, what if an employer doesn't know. Well, actually, if you've ticked the box, the employer knows that there is something that you can support with. So at that point, if your impairment is such that it is a disability and protected by disability, actually you should therefore be able to ask for reasonable adjustments if you need them. And that might be, as you say, a flex start, and whatever it may be that you need. So no, it shouldn't. The reality of the world is that unfortunately from time to time it will, but if it does, there's a potential claim there, and you shouldn't take it lying down.
And again, I think employers are very GDPR, fines are huge, so the protection of people's private information is right up there, so it shouldn't affect. And have you ever heard of something like that happening in your world, Emma?
I think the analogy is somebody suddenly gets so far down the interview line, and then they say they're pregnant, and then the employer goes, oh no, what are we going to do here now? We've got to hire this person. So it's that risk, isn't it? I think that's probably the fear that somebody that's suffering with mental illness might perceive, that they've ticked it and they might in some way have damaged their chances. Well, if a decision is made against somebody, or they're treated less favourably because of a disability, they've been discriminated against, and there's a potential claim there. So employers should know better and shouldn't be doing it, full stop. They certainly shouldn't be doing it from their own risk, and if they do, then there's a claim there. But no, I would say shout about it to make sure that you get the support and protection you deserve.
And I really feel, what the journey we're on, and the way the story is being written, it's only going to become more and more open, accepted, supported. Look at the conversations around dyslexia and that as a disability. People didn't even want to mention it. Now it's praised. It's seen as, having people who can, neurodiverse workforce, better for business, better for engagement, better for everyone. So we're on the right track.
Absolutely. And there's, just going to the dyslexia point, there's so much software and, easy wins with software. And actually, if you do have an employee that comes to you and says that they're struggling with whatever the disability may be, work with them about how you can support them, but also work with outside charities and outside organisations, because there are plenty that may support the employee's particular condition that can sometimes come into your workplace and say, you can do X, Y, Z. And some of them will be able to say, we can get you funding for. That's right. So explore everything.
Indeed, very much. Oh my God, our time just flies when we're in our flow. And Emma, thank you so much. It's been so enlightening. I like to think I do my research when I come along, but God, I feel blown away by your knowledge and your advice and your approach today. So thank you for
pleasure. I hope it's helpful. And if anybody wants to reach out to discuss anything that they haven't wanted to discuss on the forum, then obviously feel free.
Yeah, absolutely. So Emma and I are both on LinkedIn. Please follow us. We're also on Instagram, and we will send a recording. You're not. The main group are on LinkedIn. But we will also send you our contact details with this recording later on today. So hopefully, as Emma said, if you do have questions, we're around. But for now, we're going to sign off. I'm going to release the poll results, which in the end said that 81% of you had more recently supported colleagues or had to manage health issues. So Emma, I think at the start you said that's going to be most likely the outcome just because of everything with the pandemic, right?
Mm. And awareness more generally, I think, and people are less afraid to speak out, which is exactly as it should be. Yeah. So that, you know, that is just going to go up and up and up, and it's pretty high to start with. Yeah.
And, you know, let's make sure we've got the tools and the support to facilitate that and do it well. We had 9% said not a long time ago, and only 9% not seen at all. So again, I think, you know, the support for people with mental health challenges is moving in the right direction. And as employers, you will retain and grow your workforce to be more happy, engaged and productive. So doing it right, it really is a win-win.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you all for having me.
On that note, we're going to sign off for today. Emma, thank you so much. We'll see you again in a few weeks. And to everyone else, we'll see you midday next Thursday. Bye for now.